The revolution's begun. The time to stand up has come. We are the rocking of the throne. We are the rocking of the throne.
My name is Victor Tiffany, the co-founder of Revolt Against Plutocracy, and tonight I have a very special guest, a person I consider an actual offline friend as well as a fellow revolutionary, and he's going to talk to us tonight about what is considered in some circles a controversial idea they refer to as modern monetary theory. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Hey, buddy. Thank you very much, Victor, for having me on.
You're welcome. So, we're just going to start with paying for, or the idea of paying for the programs, or some of these programs that are in the contract for American renewal. There's some expensive things in there. Medicare for all, it will be very expensive. College, free college for qualified students, public schools, of course, and a massive infrastructure spending program. All these would put a burden on the government, or at least would require a lot of spending, a lot of generating of funds of some sort. Somehow the government would have to pay for these. And so I'm thinking, if you could answer this question along the lines of a candidate who has signed the contract, who has committed himself to these programs or herself to these programs, Mr. Candidate, how is the government going to pay for these?
Well, it's really simple, Victor. We've gotten into this very strange world where we believe somehow or another that we're missing dollars. We don't have enough pieces of paper. We don't have enough keystrokes in the world. And the reality is that's just another rich man's lie that we tell ourselves, because we can't fathom the fact that our government is the creator of the U.S. dollar. It's a law. And so this law is what governs it. So, Congress has basically given up its fiscal responsibility for the last 40 years under neoliberalism. And I would strongly suggest folks remember that Congress controls the purse strings, to go back old school and use terminology from, a foregone era. I mean, Congress is in control. It's not the Federal Reserve. It's not the Treasury. It is 100% Congress writes a bill. It authorizes spending. It sends a piece of paper over to the Fed. The Fed makes, keystrokes into the Treasury's accounts, and the Treasury then spends those dollars out into existence. Or you could even say it differently. Treasury goes ahead and writes checks, and then the Fed makes sure that they clear.
So one of the questions that came up then in this scenario is, are there any constraints on federal spending?
Well, so absolutely. Ultimately, Stephanie Kelton wrote a phenomenal piece about, can we give everybody a pony? And it's like, yes, the government can give everyone a pony if we breed enough ponies. The issue is always about real resources. The dollars are just tallies, scorekeeper, a stroke on a piece of paper or a keystroke in a spreadsheet. It's a ledger entry. But we can always have enough ledger entries unless the people have stopped having fingers to keystroke them. So the issue is, do we have enough ponies to give everybody in the country? And the answer is not at this point, because we haven't raised enough or bred enough ponies.
So if I can actually bring in a very specific example here, and that would be Medicare for all, right? Sure. The government is going to fund this care, but there's probably not enough doctors, not enough nurses, not enough hospitals and facilities, which will create, at least in the short term, some, if not hyperinflation, at least some inflation of too many dollars, too much effective demand chasing not enough supply. Is that accurate?
So what you'll probably see, quite frankly, is actually deflation, because the efficiency of a well-run system is actually the antithesis. Forgive the car going behind me. It's the antithesis of chaos, and chaos breeds opportunity, which is oftentimes a capitalist wet dream, is to have a lot of chaos because they make money off of it. Reality is that it appears that Medicare for all would actually be deflationary. However, to your point, we don't have enough doctors in this country. We don't have enough nurses. We don't have enough hospital beds. We don't have enough x-ray machines and so forth. So what this would do to our economy, quite frankly, is cause a boom in production of these products and services. We would have to acquire them. We would have to train people. It would create an economic boom. It would create a bottleneck in the short term. There would be some difficulties in terms of meeting demand, but it would be an awesome opportunity for us as a nation to once again ramp up production to meet demand.
So I'm a little confused. How is that not inflationary if you have all these people who have effective means, because the government's going to pay for it, of getting medical care, and there's not enough medical care out there because we have, in this short-term period that right after Medicare for All is established, and so there's not enough doctors and facilities and so forth. How is that not inflationary?
Well, so you would always have a minor push-pull type, inflationary situation, but it wouldn't cost you and I anything if we do this the right way. We would have a single-payer service where the government would be on the hook for that. So the issue of quote-unquote inflation is kind of a misnomer. The reality is that it would just probably create bottlenecks for care in some circles. There's places in our country, I'm sure, that could handle the increased demand. Right now, it's an extremely inefficient system. So my suspicion would be that there would be a momentary lag as we ramped up production to get those nurses and doctors and so forth into place to be able to supply the demand. But in terms of a hyperinflation is an actual rejection of the U.S. currency. In other words, we're no longer using, it's everything. Every bit of our economy is now no longer functional. The dollar is no longer purchasing bread. It's not purchasing electric. You got to have barrels. This is not a rejection of currency. This is a momentary blip on a given, industry.
I understand that. I'm actually going to come back to hyperinflation here in a couple of minutes. Dick Cheney famously said that Reagan taught us deficits do not matter, which is one of the points of modern monetary. I think of it as reality, and you actually had a guest speaker one time who said it's not a theory, it's reality. So I'm going to refer to modern monetary reality. But that begs the question, isn't this reality open to good and evil? In other words, while people like you and I might want to fund healthcare for people who need it, conservatives, whether it's Cheney or this boob in the White House, Trump, might want to fund wars and more wars, and then more equipment and refinements to more hardware, and just endless funding of weapons of destruction and mass destruction. This isn't ideological, is it?
No, first of all, MMT is about as blasé and boring as it can be. It's actually the ultimate apolitical statement. It has nothing to do with being progressive, has nothing to do with being conservative. It's just the way it is. It's like that brick wall is a brick wall. It's not political. It's just a brick wall. And that's what MMT describes. MMT says, this is how it is. So a hammer can be used to be, a tool of blunt force instrument where you kill someone with it, or it can be used to build a home. So when you think about it, the way I like to think about it is this: I peel it back. We've already seen what the right wing can do with this in place. And we already know beyond the shadow of a doubt that the right wing has put all their effort into beefing up the military. That is our economic engine right now. They pour money into the defense contracts. They pour money into bringing kids up that'll trade their lives for a GI Bill. They trade dollars for screws in this country or in this state, and a seat in that one, and leather in this one, a steering wheel in that one, and they spread it throughout the entire nation. Our goal as progressives is to understand the rules of the game so that we can turn that around and make it work for us. Now, here's where it gets tricky. Victor, unfortunately, many of our own kindred, many of our own people buy into right-wing lies and myths that Milton Friedman peddled. And those Milton Friedman lies are what makes us think that we can't have nice things. That's what makes us financialize our existence while the government can blow the bejesus out of the rest of the world without one person squawking about inflation. It's because we believe that.
I believe that. It took me a while. I had to read several articles. I had to basically unlearn what it is you're describing, which is this gold standard thinking that is long behind us. So I can understand that. It takes a while to wrap your head around this this understanding that taxes do not fund spending. Let me ask you about inequality. It doesn't seem like modern monetary reality addresses inequality in any way. I mean, we don't tax necessarily, or
that's not.
We'll go ahead and explain how you think.
Let's talk about that, because a cornerstone of MMT is the federal job guarantee. So the federal job guarantee, what it does is it's not the be all end all of ending income inequality in America, but what it is the silver bullet that ends neoliberalism and begins making the country survive through the 99% versus through trickle down. And so now what you've done is you've eradicated involuntary unemployment forever. And now think about this. What happens with involuntary unemployment? People commit suicide. People are literally going to payday lenders, taking 50% loans, 100% loans, 200% loans. They're going and getting loans to pay for their electricity. They're going to get loans just to go ahead and eat for the month. People are literally financializing their existence because they are destitute. So a federal job guarantee, making a job a right, which is the cornerstone of modern monetary theory, is the key linchpin to ending not only poverty, but when you start thinking about how you structure that federal job guarantee, all the things that you promote for your CFAR are suddenly involved in that. Now, all of a sudden, you've set the bottom. You've eliminated a minimum wage. What you've done is established a living wage. Now, all of a sudden, you've set the benchmark for fringe benefits like Medicare for all, and you've set the benchmark for paid and family medical leave. So ultimately, what happens is that these people are no longer generationally destitute. They're no longer stuck in very bad situations. Take a look up there in Flint, Michigan, for example. All of a sudden, the people in Flint, Michigan are no longer trapped in an urban hell. They now can look at their state leaders and say, hey, you don't serve us, that's okay. The federal government guarantees me a job wherever I go, federally funded, state, locally administered. So now all of a sudden what I can do is I can pick up and I can say, goodbye, Michigan, I'm going to Denver where I can smoke weed for free and drink clean water. And so all of a sudden they pick up and they go. Now all of a sudden what you've done is you've created a buffer stock of employed people. Most unemployed people are hard to hire in the private sector. But now all of a sudden you've given people not only hope, but help. And now they can transition out of this public sector federal job guarantee into higher aspirations if they so choose. But the bottom line is you eradicate poverty, you eradicate involuntary unemployment, and you save, a lot of people. And yes, you begin taking away the destitution, and you begin taking away the incentive that the wealthy get by watching us have to go into credit debt to pay for our existence. So yes, all of a sudden that wealth inequality starts shrinking massively.
But you still have some obnoxiously wealthy people, right? There's no until you actually come after them and increase their taxes at some point, they're still just going to have thousands of times greater income than working stiffs like you and I.
So just think about this, right? One of the primary reasons why people want to tax the rich is because most people think that it's because they're going to pay for things. Oh, they're not paying their fair share. That's why we can't have roads and bridges and schools and education and so forth, right? The bottom line is that right there, the ultimate way to make the wealthy irrelevant is to do this stuff without them, regardless of them. Stephanie Kelton says, tell the progressive movement to stop making wealthy people the headstones of the progressive agenda. We do not have to go to the wealthy going, dear sir, please sir, perchance sir, will you give us a bit of porridge, sir? Instead, we can just do it because our government has our money. This is our national treasures, our national resources. So when you look at it from that angle, the rich become irrelevant. Now, let's go ahead and save everybody's life first. Let's save the planet from environmental and ecological destruction. Let's go ahead and get people health care. Let's get them a job guarantee. Let's change their life immeasurably. And then, after we've taken care of everybody else, then we can play Robin Hood politics and we can go after the wealthy because they're too damn rich, right? They're just too damn rich. And we can go ahead and do some different things then. But to act like we've got to do it now is a typical progressive fail ploy, which is our progressive give-up strategy, because we tie things to spending. All of a sudden, it's like, well, how are you going to pay for it? Well, we're going to tax the wealthy. Okay, so watch what happens when Grover Norquist's equally and opposite pledge of no taxes kicks in, and all of a sudden, every Republican that signed that votes no, period. Now, all of a sudden, you felt real good, fist in the air. You went ahead and pressed for those taxes, but you got nothing. Not only did you get nothing, you not only didn't raise taxes, but you didn't get anybody health care. You didn't get them free college. You didn't get anything. And now the environment's still screwed. The infrastructure's still bad. And you're sitting there feeling like, yeah, we got to tear the system down because you didn't understand to begin with why taxes exist to begin with. They drive currency. They don't pay for things. This is a fatal failure of many of the libertarian left and many of the ANCAPs and anarcho-capitalists and anarchists that don't really understand economics. They say these things and they don't really understand that what they're doing is they're creating a two-front war when there really only need to be a one-front war. Because let's be fair, if we can go ahead and pass funding for public elections, if we can go ahead and make our elections publicly funded, then all of a sudden it really doesn't make a bit of difference how much money they had at that time. We'll go after them after we've saved lives. But if people want to hijack my child's future because they have some fetish that they want to, exact, I'm going to have a problem with that. That's where we're going to break partnership because you're not going to win that war. You're not going to win that war. And quite frankly, you'll see a lot of our progressive friends, really, 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 they just refuse to hear it. It's like they're so stuck in Eugene V. Debs' world that they refuse to look at what the future might look like. They claim to want a Star Trek environment, but they refuse to actually indulge in the transition to getting us there. So, this is a real blemish on the progressive movement, quite frankly. A guy named J.D. Alt, really, really great writer for New Economic Perspectives, an architect by trade, wrote this fantastic article a few years ago, back when Paul Ryan came out and said that, the kid just wanted a lunch packed in a brown paper bag and called the free lunch an oppressive free lunch. And really what it came down to was progressives didn't know how to answer the fact that, your tax dollars aren't paying for that, Mr. Paul Ryan. Stop treating the poor badly because you think your tax dollars are paying for them. The reality is that progressives have always marched in place, fists pumping, knees pumping, and have gotten nowhere. They feel good, damn it, we protested, but they got zero accomplished.
Let me ask you in a few minutes we have remaining about the size of the debt. At what point might it matter? In other words, investors can always go play a different game. They don't have to operate here in the United States. We have a world market, so they may just drop the U.S. dollar, and there may be a little chip at the margin here and chip at the margin there, and all of a sudden this entire system collapses because at some point investors just doubt the U.S. is ever going to, I don't want to say pay the debt because that falls into antiquated concerns, but really it's just a concern that is 200% of the GDP ratio, debt to GDP ratio too much, 300%. Is there a point where there's a risk of losing the investment class because they just don't have faith in the United States and in the currency any longer?
Well, as long as we have people on the right and the left, quite frankly, that are sitting there playing the devaluation game, which is really a gold standard game anyway. think about this. Japan doesn't have a petrodollar. Japan doesn't have a standing army around the world. Japan has a 250% debt to GDP ratio right now, and they are just a little island nation, okay? And they have more equality in their nation than anywhere else. They got high-speed rail. They got tons of incredible things. They've got a lifestyle that we could only dream of, okay? And they're sitting there. They can barely break 2%. 2%. They can't even touch 2% inflation, Victor. This is, and quite frankly, our Federal Reserve, which is run by neoliberals right now, it's not an issue of it being private or public. The fools that say that stuff I have to almost ignore because it's just obnoxious. But the reality is that when you look at the Fed can't understand why our inflation's like next to nothing now either. And it's like, guys, it's because you got your head up your butt thinking like Milton Friedman, okay? And ultimately, we don't have to worry. Debt to GDP ratio, it means nothing. What really means something, quite frankly, is the fact, what is the debt? Let's talk about what the debt actually is. Okay, so we have trade partners. We do trade all over the world. They do trade in the United States. They want access to sell goods and services in our massive #1 economy in the world. They want to be able to do business here. Okay, so what happens? They go ahead and they sell their goods and services in the United States, and they don't take those US dollars back with them to China or wherever. They keep them parked at the Federal Reserve. And what happens with that money? It either sits there doing nothing, or they buy treasury bonds that earn them a nominal interest rate. And certain short-term treasuries, long-term treasuries, whatever's available, they go ahead and buy these treasuries and they earn a small interest. Well, where do you think they get the money to buy the treasuries to begin with, Victor? It's US dollars. You can't buy treasuries in yuan or rubies or ruples or petrodollars or anything else. The only thing you can buy US treasuries in is using US dollars. So when you say they're borrowing, it's ridiculous. It's preposterous. All they're doing is taking money out of circulation and they're putting them into savings accounts. Your bank doesn't go, oh my God, we've got too many savings accounts. What are we going to do? Way too many savings accounts. No, it's ridiculous. So ultimately, all you're talking about is savings accounts at the Fed with their already earned US dollars that they got through trade that have been parked at the Fed that they've further invested. Treasury bonds are a safe bet. And the only thing, literally the only thing they do is serve to defend a positive interest rate at the Federal Reserve. Because Fed handles monetary policy, Congress handles fiscal policy. In other words, spending new dollars into existence. The Fed doesn't do that. It shifts debts around in the back end. It doesn't create new net financial assets. That's the role of Congress. So when you look at this situation, Victor, none of this stuff, the debt is a joke. We could get rid of debt altogether. We could stop selling treasuries if we wanted to. We could create what they call a zero interest rate policy, or ZIRP. It's Warren Mosler's belief that we should always have a zero interest rate policy at the Federal Reserve. And that right there would do away with the need to defend a positive interest rate. You wouldn't have to sell treasuries. So all this stuff is a lot of, when I hear people get all worked up over the debt, I know that I'm, with all due respect to you, because you and I have talked about this, so I'm talking about other people. When I hear that, I worry because they use these fears, the right wing, the Pete Peterson Foundation, all these ridiculously horrific people fan the flames of debt fear. Alex Jones and other evil folks like that run around telling everybody, Ron Paul, most evil fuck around, excuse my French, going around telling everybody it's going to collapse. Well, it's going to collapse. Run around telling, buy gold, buy gold, buy gold. And this is the stuff that we do at 3 o'clock in the morning when we've got insomnia and we're eating ice cream and we're smoking a J and we don't know what the hell is going on. So we watch these really bad infomercials. We sit there and cruise around on Bitcoin everywhere, not knowing what we're doing. And the reality is that it's just a simple deal. The United States government, like Canada, like China, like Russia, like Australia, and many others, is monetarily sovereign, unlike the EU, which is on the euro. And they are on a shared service. Very different setup. The EU is Greece and Italy and Germany and all these folks. They are almost like United States states, the states within, who are not monetarily sovereign. So when you hear people talking about, well, we'll just do Medicare for all in California, we'll just do Medicare for all in Delaware, we'll do it in Medicare for all in friggin' Timbuktu, it doesn't work that well because they don't have their own ability to create US dollars. They're heavily reliant on taxes. So this is why it must be federal, because the federal government is the owner, the creator, the monopoly issuer of the US dollar. And so that's how you pay for your CFAR, my friend. That's exactly how you do it.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate this time. We have run out of time because I'm not paying for the service, so we only get 20 minutes. I appreciate spending time with me tonight, and hopefully some people have learned some things. I'm going to certainly come back. I want to do this again sometime and ask more questions about some of this theory that I don't exactly fully understand, and I appreciate your time.
You better believe it. Anytime you want, man. This is the most important thing we can discuss. You have a good night, buddy.
All right. Thanks. You too.
Yep.
Revolt Against Plutocracy won't just be covering the news about the necessary revolution in the United States. Sometimes we'll be making the news. If you want to stay on top of the revolutionary actions and strategies of grassroots, genuine progressives, and our allies, please subscribe to our YouTube channel today.